If you want the best tool to facilitate not only writing with AI, but keeping track of every little component of your novel, including all of your characters and locations and everything, then you're going to want to pay attention to this video where I'm going to give you basically everything I know about Novelcrafter all in one video. This is a full course video about Novelcrafter, which I believe to be the best tool for writing with AI in 2024. Let's get into it. So this is a lot like some of the other full course videos that I've done. Here's a brief list of everything that we're going to be covering in this video, but don't worry, there will be timestamps down below. So if there's a specific section that you want to look up, you can go ahead and just look at those timestamps. Most videos about writing with AI come from a lot of, I can only describe them as like dude bros online that just pick a random tool. Maybe it's a tool that's paying them a high affiliate commission and they just talk about it for a little while, but don't actually have any idea of what it takes to write an actual novel. Now, my name is Jason. I worked at Kindlepreneur for 3 years, helping authors learn how to self-publish and write and market their books. And I've also written 15 books of my own and counting. And Novelcrafter has ended up being my favorite tool for writing books, especially for writing fiction. So with that, let's walk you through everything you need to know about Novelcrafter. All right, so this is Novelcrafter right here. So I thought we'd start by exploring some of the many pricing options and what each give you. And we'll talk more in depth with each of these as we go along. But there are basically 4 different options here. The first one, I think most of you don't actually need to worry about too much, and this is Scribe. It's $4 a month. Or if you get it annually, it's $40 annually. And basically all of these plans are the same as if you did 10 months in a year. So you get 2 months off for every single one of these plans. I'm going to mention it now. You will save more if you do it annually, but you will also, you're also paying more upfront. And so if you just want to try it out, then you can go with the monthly plans. The $4 plan gives you most of the features that Novelcraft offers, except you can't use AI with it. And the reason for that is because Novelcrafter is actually built to be a tool where you don't have to use AI for it. It can just be a writing tool to help you organize all of your different thoughts and keep it all in one place as you're writing your novel, which is actually, I actually do write my novels here in Novelcrafter at this point. It's basically taken over from other options like Word or Google Docs or Scrivener for me personally. And the fact that it has AI is just a bonus because AI is something that I use here and there. But if you wanted to only use it as a writing tool and not have access to any of the AI tools, you could just go with the $4 tier here. Now, the $8 tier gives you pretty much everything you get on the $4 tier, except it gives you the AI. Now, I want to be clear here. Novelcrafter doesn't actually supply you with the AI words, okay? The reason that Novelcrafter is so cheap here at $8 a month, as opposed to the $30 that other tools like Sudowrite might charge, is because you're not actually paying for the AI words right here. The AI words, the tokens of the AI, because it costs money every time the AI is generated, that has to be paid for elsewhere. And I'll walk you through the entire process of how to connect the different tools to bring the AI into Novelcrafter. But that's what this means right here when it says bring your own key. That's what that means, is that you'll get a third-party AI tool, bring it into Novelcrafter, and then you'll be paying for the AI as you go. There will not be a set allotment of AI that you get every month. You can basically use the AI to an unlimited degree, but the only caveat to that is that you have to be paying for the AI as you go along. It's pay as you go. Now, the good news is when you are paying for AI in a pay-as-you-go manner, you're actually doing it very, very cheap. It might sound like something to be worried about, that you have to pay extra in addition to these $8 a month in order to pay as you go with the AI. But most of the AI tools out there, the chatbots like ChatGPT, Claude Pro, Gemini Pro, all of those tools cost about on average $20 a month. And I use AI quite heavily in Novelcrafter, and I have never paid more than $20 a month in that entire time. In fact, usually it's more like $5 or $6 or $7 a month. If you really, really push it and you're using some of the higher, more pricier models, you might get it above that $20 a month. But in actuality, in actual function, it's very rare to pay more than $20 a month, but it will depend on you. The good news is you can cap it. it. So if you're using a tool like OpenRouter to bring the AI in, you can cap it at say $10 a month if you don't want to exceed that, and it will stop as soon as you reach that $10 limit, so you won't end up paying a lot more than you planned for, basically. So that is what you get with the hobbyist, and this is what I'm going to recommend for most people who really want to save money. But there is one major feature that I really like that you get in the artisan plan, which is an additional $6 a month. So you get everything here from the previous two things, plus you get workshop features and advanced review features. And what that means is, and I'll show this off a little bit in a minute, but what it means is that you'll get access to this tab here known as the chat, which gives you a whole bunch of additional options that you can use the AI inside of Novelcrafter. And it is actually quite useful. I use it quite a bit. So I would personally go with this artisan plan if I can, and I do. So this is the one I would recommend for most authors. If you want to save just a little bit more money, then you can go down to the hobbyist tier. That one will work as well. There is also the specialist tier, which gives you everything else, plus shared series and universes, plus collaborative writing. So there are a number of features that if you have, say, a whole series that you're working on and you want to bring characters from one to another without having to do a lot of copy pasting, and to have basically characters or items that span the series as a whole, you can do that. Also, if you're co-writing a book with somebody and you want to give them access to your book as well, that also has to be done at the specialist tier, which is $20 a month, or of course $200 a year if you're doing the annual. And that's basically the difference. There isn't a whole lot between the four different tiers. I would suggest probably artisan as being the main tier for most people. And pretty much everything that you'll see me do today will be possible in the artisan tier. If it isn't, then I will be sure to point that out. All right, so let's do a little bit of tour of what Novelcrafter has to offer and everything that you can find there. First thing you'll want to do here is say create a novel. You can also import a novel. You might have to adjust a few things. I've found that importing is always a messy business from not just Novelcrafter, but any tool out there. When you're importing books, it usually gets a few things wrong, so you might have to do a little bit of cleanup, but you can import, say, a Word doc or something into here, and it should be able to pull a lot of that in. But we're just going to create a novel here. You can use a template novel if you've set up different templates, so you can clone things from other series or novels that you've had. Basically, if you want to clone all of that stuff, you could do that. We're just going to leave this new novel here, but you can change the title at any time. You put your author or your pen name. You can select the series if you have a series, and then you say create novel. And you're brought to this empty space, and this is what it looks like with nothing here. Now I'm going to go into more depth on everything here in just a second, but let's start by just labeling every little piece so you understand just from a layout perspective where everything is. Over here you have codex and snippets. The codex is basically where you put information about your characters and things like that. Snippets is where you put just random notes that you may have. I tend to find myself putting together a number of snippets and putting them here. If you see this one that says chat, this is where you'll see different chats you may have had if you have that artisan tier, and you access the chats by going here, and they're accessible either from here or from here, where you can kind of just see them and place them there if you want to, if you need them for quick access. Another important thing to look at here is the settings. So you'll find those right here, this little gear icon. And this is where you can change your novel, your author name, your series. You can even delete the novel here, although of course be careful with that. You can upload a cover. And in the settings, you'll have these 4 tabs. You've got writing. This one is useful, especially when you're setting up your novel at first, because you can select like what's the point of view for the book, what's the language, what's the tense, any presets that you have here. If you have the collaboration that you get on that highest tier, you can add the people that you want to collaborate with in here. And then if you want to export your novel, you can do so here, but right now there's no content, so there's nothing to export, but you can do that from this tab here in the settings as well. So that's the settings, and over here, of course, is the codex and the snippets. The places where you'll be spending the most time are these tabs here at the top. And these are pretty straightforward. We'll start with the plan tab, which is where we currently are and where you will usually come to when you first open a novel. you'll come to this place where it says plan, and this is basically where you outline your book if you're an outliner. If you're not an outliner, then that's okay. You can kind of leave this blank, but you can just come here and say create for scene and start putting in a summary of what happens in this scene. If you're looking for AI to help you generate ideas for this scene, that is kind of a separate thing. It's not done here, and so I won't get into that at this particular time. But let's say you already know what happens in a scene. You can put the summary here. That'll be useful for the AI to access later on. And then of course you can add more chapters as you want. You'll notice this has been automatically categorized under Act 1. You can add other acts here like Act 2 and then add new chapters under Act 2. Another cool thing that you can do, and I'm just going to delete these for now, is you can come here and say create from outline. So there are a couple of templates that have been included here already. You can just paste your outline in here. In order to automatically generate everything correctly, you'll want to make sure it's formatted in this particular way with the example that it's giving you here. And if you do that, it'll automatically just dump everything into all of the correct places. But you can also choose from these common templates. So for instance, on this channel, I've talked about Derek Murphy's 24 chapter novel outline a lot. So you could go ahead and select that and it will automatically put everything here, and all you would have to do is fill these things out. You could do that here. You could also just hit create and it will create the spaces for all of the different chapters for you. And then you could just add your summary of every chapter here as you go. Additionally, within each chapter, you might have multiple scenes. And so you can create a new scene by selecting this button right here. So if you have multiple scenes inside of one chapter, you can just manage those here. Now, Novelcrafter is one of those tools that I find it to be pretty easy to get started, but difficult to master, which is what most good software tools are. And there are a lot of like little details that we could really get down into the weeds of. For instance, if you click on this, it allows you to do things like disable numeration. So instead of saying Act 1, we just have Hero and Ordinary World, right? Or we can enable that again. The same goes for any of the chapters. You can just disable numeration if you don't want them to be numerated. Maybe you want them to just have a title that they can use. That can all go there. You can also copy all of the prose, copy all of the outline summaries that you've got from this act or from this chapter. If you just want to copy all of the outline summaries or all of the prose from this chapter, you can just do it from here. And if you click this editing button right here, this will take you immediately to the Write tab up here so you can start to actually write the scene. We're not going to do that just yet. I'm going to delete these scenes here. But you'll notice as I'm opening these up that there are a lot of things that you can specify here at the scene level. For instance, you can set a custom point of view. Now, it's possible to set the point of view for an entire novel all from the settings. So if you have a book that you know that the point of view is going to be from one person the entire time, you could do it at the novel level. But if you're doing, say, a third person limited type of deal, then in that case, you would want to set it at the scene level. And that's what you do here. You just say set custom POV and you'll select your characters. Now, we haven't created any characters yet, so we don't see that option available here to us, but we could just select like third person limited and then select our character, right? Other things we can do here, we can add a subtitle. We can exclude this from the AI context. So there may be reasons why we don't want the AI to be able to see this data. So that is an option. We can chat with this scene, meaning if we select this, it'll take us to the chat here and we can just chat with the scene, which basically is allowing the AI to look at that scene and understand the context of the scene. And you can ask it questions and things like that, and which is a really great tool for editing or for just brainstorming where things could go next, that sort of thing. You can look at a summary of everything you've done with the scene so far. So anytime that you've edited this, there's context stored for that, for both the summary and the contents. And of course, you can copy the scene's prose, export the scene, delete the scene, all of those right here. So that's the plan tab. The next one we want to look at here is the Write tab. This is where you're going to be spending probably most of your time actually writing the scenes. Now, of course, you can just write this out yourself. You don't have to use AI. If you only want to use AI as a brainstormer or as an editor or something like that, then totally disregard everything I'm about to say here. You can just write it all out and then use AI in other ways. But if you do want to write with the AI, all you do is do a backslash here and select something from one of these options here. You have an option for a scene beat, which is where you give it a summary of what should happen next, and then it writes it out, at which point you could then edit it down and things like that. You could just ask it to continue writing. If you really have no idea what should happen next, this could be a good brainstorming tool where it just allows the AI to sort of determine what happens next. Usually I don't keep any of that, that, but it sometimes gives me some good ideas for what might happen next. You can also add a codex edition. So this is where you can actually tell the AI that something has changed about a character. And I'll get more into depth onto this when we go into codex. You can create a horizontal line for formatting, also creating a section, which could just be basically a section of text that you've shrunk down like an accordion, or it gives you that option at least. So this is where you do all of the writing. You don't have to do any of those things. You could just write it all yourself, however you like. Over here on the side, you'll see the summary of the scenes. We don't have anything written here, but if we did, let's just add something here. Mary has her little lamb. And now you'll see that is listed here because that was part of the summary in the plan tab. And you can do that for all the scenes. You'll see them here. Also of note here in the right section is this little button that leads to actions, which you'll see for every scene, allows you to disable numeration, and basically gives you all of the same options that we covered already in the plan tab, also accessible from here. You can also add new scenes, add new chapters, etc. from the right tab. Next, we have the chat tab. And the chat tab is basically a chatbot type scenario, but one that is fully integrated into AI so it can access information that you may have inside of Novelcrafter already. And this is a feature that's only available in the artisan plan or above. So that's something to keep in mind. You can have various prompts, system prompts for the chat tab, which can be selected here. And I'll go more into depth on that later in the video. But this allows you to create, let's just go with a general purpose one for demonstration purposes. It gives you a number of different models that you can use, including GPT-4o, GPT-4 Turbo. We have Claude 3, Claude 3.5 Sonnet, which is my current favorite as I'm recording this. And so you can select which model it's using, which is great because you can use all of the models here. Another thing you can do down here is give it context. So what this means is sometimes it's useful to give it an idea of what it is that you're talking about. So if we select context, you can give it the context of your full novel outline, which means that novel outline will be included in the prompt and it will automatically be able to see the content of that outline. So you can ask it questions about the outline, maybe ask for ideas on what should go where, etc. That can all be done here. You can even give it the full novel text, although that's the sort of thing I would only do with some of the larger models that can handle large amounts of data like that, and it will be a costlier thing to do. So remember what I said about how I rarely go more than about $20 a month. In fact, it's rarely more than $10 a month. That's because I'm not doing this very often. Sometimes it's useful to have the whole novel text in the prompt, but in this particular case, you could only use it with Claude models or the GPT-4o models or some of the Gemini models that can handle such large amounts of text. And like I said, that would cost you a lot more. Additionally, if you pull up something from your codex, it will all be showing up here. So there's lots of different things you can do to be able to interact with information that you have stored elsewhere in Novelcrafter. You can seamlessly interact with it here in the chat. I'll give you some examples of how that can work later on. Next, we have the review tab, and this is basically just a series of data for the actual novel itself. Now, because we have no actual words listed here, you won't see anything, but this will give you basic things like word count, the total word count, character distribution by scene, so it's able to look and see how involved is each character in each scene, so you can make sure there's a good balance there. You can look at a heat map of how the codex entries are appearing in each of the scenes, and I understand there's some more work being done on the review tab to add some more interesting things here as well. Next, I want to also talk about prompts. So if you're using AI inside of Novelcrafter, down here you'll see this prompts button, and this gives you a list of all of the different prompts. Any of the prompts that you see that say system here are the system prompts that are baked into Novelcrafter by themselves, and these cannot be modified, but they can be cloned, and the clone can be modified from there, is what you can see I've done here. I have like the general purpose system prompt, but then I have general purpose demonstration, general purpose nonfiction, general purpose super, which are all just names that I've put to them. So you can take any of these prompts and modify them to your heart's content as a separate prompt. You can also take any of these prompts and create your own prompts for use inside of Novelcrafter. And there are different categories of prompts here. These, for instance, are all scene beat completions, which means that when you have written a scene beat and you're writing that scene beat out with AI, the prompt that you use to do that can vary depending on which of these prompts that you're using. And so if you have a particular way that you like it to write out the scenes, you can do that right here. Additionally, you have things like text replacement. This is where you highlight a piece of text and then ask the AI to make modifications to that text depending on what your prompt is. And we'll see some good examples of this in action as well. Then you have workshop chat categories of prompts here. These are the ones that are accessible inside of the chat feature up here. And these are different ones that I've created. There's a general purpose one and a scene beats from summary that are baked into Novelcrafter on its own. But having the flexibility to create my own prompts here is very important. I'll show you a very simple example of what this looks like. So for instance, I have one here and I've made sure to select the models so you can add different models here. In fact, I am probably right now going to add the Claude 3 Sonnet, Claude 3.5 Sonnet here as being another model. And I'm actually going to have that replace GPT 3.5, which I was using here. So you can select any model here. You can select several if you want to have a choice. Right now, I'm pretty confident that 3.5 Sonnet will be able to do what I want it to do with this prompt. So I'm just going to leave it on one model for now for this particular prompt. Then I come over here to instructions and I have the system message and then the user input. So it says, whenever you are given text, rewrite it to change the tense to past tense and convert instances of past perfect, aka had done or had been, to regular past tense, aka did or was. This is a prompt to just basically change things from present tense or future tense or whatever the tense is to past tense. And then it says text to rewrite. And then we have a little code snippet here, which is what this means is it's bringing in the text that I have highlighted, and from there, it is able to bring it back into past tense. So to briefly show this in action, we're going to say Mary has a little lamb. She is very happy with that lamb. The lamb loves Mary. If we have a series of sentences like this, and then we hit that prompt, which is available on all of these are those same prompts that we were just looking at. The one we're looking for here is make past tense. All I have to do is select that and it rewrites it. It says, Mary had a little lamb. She was very happy with that lamb. The lamb loved Mary. So it is automatically done what I asked it to. And that's an example of a very simple prompt that I've created here in Novelcrafter, but you can have much more complicated ones. The system prompts are usually a little bit more complicated. If you look at, say, this general purpose prompt, it does all of these things on the back end, which is all useful, but at the same time, you might be a little overwhelmed with all of these little code snippets. And that's okay because we'll go more in depth on that later. Okay, last but not least, in the overview here, we're going to talk about export right here. If you hit export, it gives you the option to export your novel in a variety of different formats. So you can select which scenes you want to export and which ones you want to leave out, if any. You can toggle things like whether you want to export the summaries of the scenes as well, or just the prose. Or if you want to export just the summaries and not the prose, if you want to include things like the act titles, which it recommends disabling if you're uploading this document to Atticus or Vellum for formatting, for example, as well as including scene dividers and scene subtitles and all of that. That can all be toggled here. And from there, you'll just export it and it creates a Word doc or a Markdown.md format. And that's a basic general tour of Novelcrafter. So the next thing that I want to go into is we're going to go more in depth on the codex and what the codex is able to do for us. Now, before we go any further, we want to make sure that we have AI fully integrated into Novelcrafter. And the way you do this is to go down here to settings and then make sure that your AI credentials are listed here. Now, there are a couple of places where you can get AI credentials, but the two most important ones are going to be OpenAI and OpenRouter. OpenAI will bring in all of the different OpenAI models, including GPT 3.5, GPT-4, and GPT-4o. Additionally, if you have created any fine-tuned models with OpenAI, those are going to be available inside Novelcrafter here. And that's why it's really important to make sure you connect your OpenAI key. And to get an OpenAI key, you're going to want to create an account with OpenAI's platform, not with ChatGPT, but with the URL is platform.openai.com. You want to come to here, platform.openai.com/playground. and you'll be greeted with basically this is the API interface where you can chat with the AI much as you would in ChatGPT, but with a little bit more control. And then here on the left hand side, you want to go down here to where it says API keys, and then you'll want to select create a new API key. When you do that, you'll get a chance to name it. You'll assign it to whatever projects. You just keep it at default projects, permissions at all, and then create secret key. Then you'll be greeted with a rather long number right here, which you can then copy the key. And then all you have to do is go into Novelcrafter, select new, and that will connect Novelcrafter to your OpenAI API. Keep in mind that if you are generating words through the API, you are going to be charged for those words. It's not a whole lot, especially if you're using some of the models like GPT-4o. But in order to see how much you are using this particular API, you can come here to usage and look here under cost and see exactly how much you have been doing. As you can see, I have not been using it much. I have a bill of 23 cents over the last month. Now that's more of a case of me just not using OpenAI models very much. I prefer to use other models. So if you want to use other models, the best way to do that is to go to a site called openrouter.ai. And the process of hooking OpenRouter to Novelcrafter is actually a little bit simpler than doing your OpenAI API. All you have to do is make sure you create an account here and make sure you are logged in to your OpenRouter account. And then come here to Novelcrafter. Once again, hit new, and then come here to where it says OpenRouter and hit connect, and it should be able to just automatically connect you to your OpenRouter account. OpenRouter has access to pretty much all of the different models out there, including the ones from Anthropic, including some open source models like Llama 3 and some others that allow you to do not safe for work content and stuff like that. So if you want access to all of those models, this is the place to go. Go to OpenRouter, create an account, and then hook it up. Once you're in your OpenRouter account, just like you can in your OpenAI API, you can look at the activity that you've been doing. And as you can see, I've been using this one a little bit more heavily. I have, just today, I have several chats, and each chat cost a few cents each. And that was kind of an expensive, aggressive chat that I was experimenting with. And so for that reason, this is kind of pricier, getting up to 7 cents per chat. That's because I was testing things out. That's not necessarily what you're going to be dealing with every time. And that's using Mistral Large, which is one of the larger models out there, although it is one that allows you to do more not safe for work things and stuff like that. Additionally, I've been using a lot of Claude 3.5 Sonnet, as you can see here, and this is much cheaper. As you can see, this one chat cost me less than a cent, almost about 27% of 1 cent for the one chat. So it's a lot cheaper than what I was experimenting with Mistral Large, which is one of the reasons why I really like 3.5 Sonnet, because it is much more affordable. You're not going to be using up your tokens very quickly with 3.5 Sonnet. If you are worried about cost, about using too much money with the AI, you can come here to credits, and you can top this off with however much you want. So if you only want, say, $5, you can put $5 here. And once you use up those words, it will not let you generate more words. And so you can be rest assured that it won't spend more than $5 accidentally. So you can basically just put $5 on there and see how long it lasts you. I think you'll be surprised how long $5 can go, especially if you're using cheaper models like Claude 3.5 Sonnet. Now, there are other options in Novelcrafter if you want to add other accounts to this. So you could add LM Studio, which is a way of using models off of your own machine and including it into Novelcrafter. So you could literally be running the models just from your own computer and using them inside of Novelcrafter, which is useful. The same goes for this one, Ollama, another local runner for your large language models. And then you can also connect a Mistral account if you have a Mistral account, and there are a bunch of others. But really the two that I go for the most are OpenRouter, because you can access pretty much everything in there, as well as OpenAI, particularly if you have fine-tuned models. I recommend connecting your OpenAI account. Other than those two, you can go down the list and add these if you want. Otherwise, it's up to you. Once that's done, your Novelcrafter account will be connected to AI, and you can pull in AI at any point where AI is used. So here in the writing section, for example, you can use it. In the chat here, you can use it if you have the artisan plan. That's basically how this works. All right, so I've actually pulled in one of my current projects that I'm working on. This is a book called The Fall of the Fairy. It's book 5 in a series that I've already written the first 4 books for, but I'm using AI and some other tools at my disposal to write this to help me finish up this series. There's going to be 6 in total, but I'm pulling this in so you can see what some of these things look like, some of these features look like when they are in full use. So the first thing I want to take a look at is the codex. So the codex, as you can see, is accessible here, as we already went over. And I've already got a few codex entries here, but not very many, okay? You can really go to town with the number of codex entries that you include here. And the way to start a new codex entry is to go here to New Entry, and then select whatever it is that you're looking to do. This can be a character, a location, an object, lore, subplot, other. You can even have global entries. So this will be entries the AI is going to be able to look at it pretty much every time it's used. So if you have things that you want the AI to understand every time it's being used, this is a good way to do that. Same goes for style guide and story genre. If you want to just establish those and make sure the AI understands what style you want to write in, what genre you're writing in, basically all the time, you can put that information here. The one you'll probably be using the most here is characters. So let's go ahead and look at that. If you're unfamiliar with this whole setup, this may be a little overwhelming for you. So I'll go ahead and break this down. There's really only a few things that you need to know. So I'm going to create a character here called Guyan. He's a character in this story. So next we want to establish what the tags or labels are. If there are any, you might not need to add anything here, but we could add something like, say, side characters as a category for this character. And that way we could put other characters inside the same category and so forth. So I'm going to add that. Then we're going to add aliases and nicknames. The aliases and nicknames is basically if this character goes by any other name in this series, we want to make sure the AI is able to pick up on that. So we want to establish what are the other names that he might be using. So in this case, I might say something like Knight of Temperance, because that's sort of a title that he has. Other than that, that Guyan really is the name that he uses. So that's all I'm going to put there. And then we want to establish more information about his character. Keep in mind, this information here that goes in this description is what the AI is going to see when we are writing with this character. So if I'm writing a scene and Guyan is in the scene, we want to make sure the AI has information about that character so it can write their voice a little bit differently than any of the other characters. So some of the things to keep in mind in this particular description box are things like physical appearance, communication style / dialogue style, personality, we could even say personality type, motivations, and you could go down this line a little bit more and really flesh this out depending on how detailed you want this character to be. I usually find that the results I get out of the AI are better when I keep this a little bit more simple. So you could just say things like medium, height, brown hair, cut short, a well-trimmed dark beard, usually wearing plate armor, but sometimes seen more casually. And then you can add things to the communication style and the dialogue style. This is important because when the AI is writing their voice, we want to make sure that voice sounds distinct. And so this was one of the most important sections of this description. So you might say something like, he speaks in short, punchy sentences, always to the point. And if you want, you could expand this a lot more. For sake of time, we're going to leave it at that. Personality type, you can give information about how he thinks, how he feels, but you could also put actual like Myers-Briggs or Enneagram information in there to sort of convey a lot of information to the AI without saying it in a ton of words. So you could say, and I don't actually know what his type would be, so I'm just going to say INFP on the Myers-Briggs personality test. We could put more things here, but I could say he values self-control and self-mastery above all else, to the point that it often annoys others who perceive him as self-righteous. But recently, he has gotten better at allowing others to just be themselves while he works on his own self-mastery. So that's something that I might put under personality type. We'll just leave it at there for now. You get the idea. The other thing to note here is progressions and additions. So this is something where, let's say something changes about Guyan halfway through the story. I might at that point say, okay, this is something different, more information about that character, and I don't want the AI to see it until we get to a certain chapter. So let's just go to the right section here. Let's just say here at the start of chapter 6, we're going to add a codex edition here. And we want to select the right character. So we could select Guyan and say Guyan has, I don't know, broken his leg at this point. He is unable to walk normally, but has makeshift crutches that were found in the castle vaults that allow him to get around. When we put something like this, that means that when the AI is writing Guyan's character in this scene, it's going to be showing him with crutches, basically. It's going to add that addition to this point from here on out. But if we were to write his character in chapters 5 or above, it wouldn't have that because the AI wouldn't be seeing that he had broken his leg at this point. And so this is a really powerful tool to be able to show progression for a character over time. So let's go back into the codex note. Everything we just covered is here in the details phase, and you can see that the progress addictions has added thing about his broken leg here. So you'll see all of those progression additions here. But let's go to the next tab over, which is notes. And we'll say these notes are only visible to you and not used in the generation of new pros. So basically these are notes just for you. If you have more information about this character, maybe their backstory that you don't necessarily need the AI to know, or maybe you have something that's more fleshed out, or just a note to yourself, this is the place to put that. So that's simple enough. Next, we want to look at references. So there are a couple of boxes to check here. If you want, you can say always include this entry in the AI context. So by default, Novelcrafter only accesses the character's information if that character is in the scene. I'll show you what this looks like so you know how it happens. So if I were to start a scene beat and say Sir Guyan, you'll immediately notice that this name is highlighted, and that's an indicator to the AI that this character is in the scene, so it will pull in Guyan's information for this particular scene. But if for whatever reason you wanted the AI to always pull in Guyan's information, then what you do here is go to Guyan's references here and say always include this entry in the AI context. That way it will always be showing up. And we'll go ahead and uncheck that for now. You can also do the opposite. You can say don't automatically track this entry by name or alias, and don't automatically include in the AI context when detected. So these are ways of removing Guyan's information from the context if he is detected, if that's something that you want. But there is a lot of flexibility, right? And that's one of the good things about Novelcrafter is if you want to do something or remove something, there's a lot of flexibility there so that you can basically do anything that you want. But in general, I would just leave this alone. You can also look at nested references. So if you have this character under separate entries, so let's say Guyan is part of a group and that group has its own codex entry, well, then you could nest this inside of that group. You could say, okay, I have a group inside this series called the Order of Maiden Glory, and he could be a member of that group. So if we were to do that, I would create a codex entry for the Order of Maiden Glory and then include Guyan as a member. That way, whenever Guyan's information is pulled, it will also pull information about the Order of Maiden Glory and know automatically that he is a member of that group. So that's what nested references mean. And if you want, you can also add URLs, references to other websites, web pages, Google Docs, anything that you want to add here, just to kind of keep it all in one place. You can do that. That's just a way of organizing your information. And then last but not least, we have appearances, which is just showing us where in the text he shows up. So he shows up in a couple of places in my chapter 1, scene 1. And I can even open this so it'll pull me right to that scene so I can find more information about him. So that's what it looks like to create a character inside of the codex. Now, if you look at any of these others, like location, for example, everything will look pretty much the same. The only difference is that this is tagged as a location. Now, let's say you have something that you want to include in the codex that's not categorized here. So of the character, location, object, lore, subplot, and other, there isn't really one that you have here. Well, you can actually create more categories if you want. So the way to do that is to hit this little gear icon and hit custom categories. And one thing that I saw in some of the examples that other people are using Novelcrafter, and shout out to Bite Size Booksmith for really getting me in on this idea, is creating a category for tropes. So let's say you're plotting a novel and you want to make sure the AI understands certain tropes that you want to have in that novel. A great way to do that is to include it as a codex entry. Then anytime you want to include that trope, you can say to the AI, include XYZ trope, right? So let's create a new category and we're going to call it tropes. And you can give it a color here if you want. So let's make this green, right? If you have the series version of Novelcrafter, you can have this affect the novel or the series. I'll just hit it with the novel for now. So then if you want to include a codex entry on a specific trope, you could come here to new entry. I would just go to other. Let's call this the enemies to lovers trope. It's not actually a trope that I have in this book, but we'll just put it here. And then under tags labels, we could call this trope and add that as a tag. And notice that it's putting it here under the other category, right? We got enemies to lovers trope. That's not what I want. So let's go back to our list of custom categories and tropes, and then we want to say associated tags. So we're going to select a tag of tropes. Now everything that it gets tagged as tropes is now automatically included in this category. And if I close this, you'll see, oh look, enemies to lovers trope is now included under a category of tropes. Right? And so now, because I tagged this as tropes, it's automatically included here, and any codex entries I make that are tagged as tropes will be included here in this category. So this is a powerful way of creating new categories for you to include lots of information here that the AI might need to know, and you can pull in at your leisure. So just to give us a little bit of information to populate that trope, we want to say, give me one paragraph describing the enemies to lovers trope. I'm just going to do this in the chat. I'm going to make sure this, and so I'll go ahead and hit send, and it'll just give me a little bit of information about it. And from there, I can just copy and paste this and put it in the enemies to lovers trope. You might want to fix this up a little bit to make sure it actually gives that accurate reflection of how you perceive the enemies to lovers trope and how you want it to work in your novel. I'm just doing this now so we can have something quick to put in here. And so now we have information about the enemies to lovers trope, which we can put to good use at this point. So that's how you would categorize and organize all of these different codex entries. I've seen some people that have just mountains and mountains of information here categorized under various things, and they'll color code everything. So that's the basics of how to create codex entries. There's obviously a lot that you can do there. The other thing that I wanted to talk about here is just snippets. Now, snippets are usually just pieces of information that you want to store for whatever purpose. They're usually notes that you make to yourself. You might have, say, a sample chapter in here. I, as you can see, have a chapter here that I've created as a sample. The reason I have this is because I actually sometimes want to pull in snippets into my prompt. There are ways that you can do this. I won't get into them right now, but if I wanted to pull a snippet into a prompt, I could. It just doesn't happen in the same way that the codex does. And I would have to manually place it into the prompt that I've selected to do that. But as you can see, I have a snippet here just for my working outline, just to give me some information to work on there, so I can easily access this and maybe copy and paste sections into a chat or whatever it is that I'm trying to do. It's just a useful place to put all of my other notes, some of which could be used to access the AI as well. And that's the basics on codex and snippets, everything you need to know there. You can spend a lot of time just fleshing this out, and so I recommend you do that because it's going to inform the AI as you're writing in a big way. Now let's move into the next section, which is to talk about the plan section of Novelcrafter. Now I've already gone over a lot of this, but as you can see, I've really fleshed out this plan section here. So we have access to the acts and the chapters, and you can add new scenes to each chapter if you have more than one scene per chapter. And as I've already mentioned, you can come here to these settings and you can copy different things. At the scene level, you get even more options where you can, like detect characters or chat with the scene. or duplicate the scene, or, exclude this from the AI context if there's like information there you don't want the AI to know per se. Lots of different options here, most of which you probably won't need most of the time, but they can be useful to have available if you want that total control and total flexibility of the AI tool, which I think is one of the big pluses of Novelcrafter. But for the most part, you're just going to be filling out these scenes here. Now let's say so we get into like Act 3 here, and I don't have a scene listed. What do I do, right? So one of the things we can do is brainstorm this in Novelcrafter's chat option, which again is only available in the Artisan. I'll get more into depth on the chat in just a second, but let's say we want to add some information here. What I'm going to do is go to chat, and I'm going to give it some context. I'm going to give it the full novel outline and say, give me 10 ideas for what should happen in chapter 21, I think it was. And since it has the context of the full outline, it's read everything else, and now it's going to give me 10 ideas. And it's pulling in characters. It understands the whole context of the outline because of what I've already given it here in the plan tab. So while it would be nice to have a way of actually generating these summaries with AI right here in the plan tab, that does actually cause a lot of restrictions on what you could actually do here. And sometimes we really need that flexibility. And so I like to go into the chat and sort of brainstorm with it, giving it the context, everything it needs to know in order to figure out what happens in this scene. And I guess I gave you the wrong chapter here, but that's fine. So that's how that works. You could also chat with a specific scene. So let's say we wanted to create some scene beats for scene 1 here. I could go back to the chat, we'll start a new chat, and in the context, I will give it just one scene's context. And I could say something like, give me 20 scene beats for this scene. Now I've already written this scene, so it's probably going to know that and go ahead and give me the summary of the scene that I've already done. Yeah, so it's doing that right now. But if I hadn't done that, if all I had is the summary of the scene, it would be able to give me scene beats based on just the summary and extrapolating from that. The point is you can chat with an individual scene based on what's here in the plan section. As I've already mentioned, you can create from different templates. So if we create from outline, you could do a 3-act structure, save the cat, hero's journey, etc. This just to set out the different sections, or you can just add your information here. I generally like to write all of my outlines myself, and so I'll just go ahead and do that based on whatever templates that I have. And I'll only consult AI to give me ideas if I really am kind of stuck on a particular scene. And speaking of which, I actually created a guide to really help me in this outlining process to give me a list of everything that should happen in a novel from a plotting perspective, including basically every step of character arc. All of those things can be boiled down to specific steps, and I've framed it all in a 40-chapter plot template that I call the plot module. Module for modular, meaning you can add different viewpoints and things like that. Here is a little cheat sheet that I created for it that you can see. I've got like, here's what could happen in your prologue. Here's what should happen in your chapter 1, in your chapter 2, in your chapter 3. And I outline everything that should happen in a total of 40 chapters. Is it totally prescriptive? No, like you can go off script, you can do whatever you want. But for those that just starting out and who really want to get past that blank page syndrome, it's really a difficult thing to kind of do that without a guide to sort of give you prompts, give you ideas. And I will even take something like this and say, hey, I don't know what should happen in chapter 3. I'll take it to the AI and say, this is a list of things that could happen in this chapter. And here's everything that I've got so far. Brainstorm 5 or 10 ideas for what could happen in this chapter based on this outline and this template. And it usually gives me a lot of good ideas, and then I can then fill in what should happen in chapter 3 and so on. So if you want to get access to this 40-chapter plot module, specifically this cheat sheet that you see right here, I have it available for free. All you have to do is sign up for my email list at storyhacker.ai, and you should get an email with a link to where you can download this. And with that, let's go into the next section, which is the write section, where we're going to actually get into writing the actual text. Now, I've already got a couple of chapters in here. So let's go all the way down to the bottom where we have this section. And even though this isn't quite the scene that we're going to write, I want to show you how the Codex edition works. And so we're going to create a scene here with Guyan where he walks up to Una and tells her that he has been freed from Kernunos enchantment. And we could put more information here. Una and Artegal are amazed and grill him on how he managed to do it. None of this is actually what's going to happen in the book, but I'm just showing you an example. You want to put a scene beat here that gives you plenty of detail, enough for basically a section of maybe 400 to 600 words that the AI is going to write based on that summary. So you got to kind of estimate how much detail do you need to give it for a 400 to 600 word section. So this might not be quite enough, but I'm just going to generate prose with this. So once you have created your scene beat, then you can come here to generate prose, and you may have a number of options here. Because I've gone already and created a few of my own prompts, I have those listed here. But the one that the Novelcrafter system has just innately is here, this one, general purpose system. All of these others that I've created are my own. Most of them just modified from the general purpose prompt here. So if we take this and go down, we can select all of the different models that we might want to use. So there are a number here. We got GPT-4o, GPT 3.5, and these are just the top models that the folks at Novelcrafter think are going to be the ones you most likely will want to use. Personally, my favorite right now is Claude 3.5 Sonnet, but if you wanted, you could actually scroll down here all the way down to try for a spin, and this will give you access to all of the different models that you have access to through OpenRouter, through all of your API keys and everything. All of those models will be available here, and there's quite a long list of them, as you can see. I'm just going to go ahead and run this with 3.5 Sonnet because it's my current favorite. And here it's starting to generate the text, right? And based on the story beat that I gave it, it's going to follow that information. Plus, it's going to pull in information about Guyan. It's pulling in information about Una. It's pulling information about Artegal, who are characters that I've listed here. So we got Una's heart leapt as she saw Sir Guyan approach, his gait unsteady but determined. The sight of him free from the icy enchantment that had gripped the other sent a jolt of hope through her. Guyan, she exclaimed, dismounting her horse in a fluid motion. How is this possible? Artegal's eyes narrowed, his hands instinctively moving to the hilt of his sword. Explain yourself, Sir Knight. And so it's definitely following the basic idea of this story beat that I gave it. And it's doing so obviously with a lot more words than the actual story beat. And so what you would want to do at this point is it'll give you the option to apply it or retry it. If you didn't like the prose, you could try again, or discard it if you didn't like it at all. Let's go ahead and hit apply, and it, the color will change, and it basically inserts that whole thing here. And at this point, what I recommend doing is actually going through this and editing it to your heart's content to make sure this is accurate before you move on to the next story beat. And the reason for that is if there's something in here that isn't right, maybe it's not factually accurate to the vision of the story that you have, if you don't fix that here, then when you go on to write the next beat, it's going to assume that that irregularity that you have is part of the story, and it will continue to write with that context. Because what most of these prompts do is it looks at the last few hundred words and uses that to determine what style it's going to continue writing in, what has happened in the last bit of the story, etc. So it'll be able to pull in things like, is this character mad or sad or whatever based on the context that has come before. And so you want to make sure that this section is exactly what you want it to look like, which is why you want to validate these words as you go. And that will actually also improve the quality of the output from most of the models that you're using, because it will see the improved edited prose that you've already gone through and edited. Now, if you want, there are tools here that can make things a little bit better. The ones that you have by default, if you highlight any of this text, it will show you, at the very least, you'll see these ones: expand, rephrase, and shorten. These are the ones that are included by default. So expand is pretty obvious. It'll take what you've highlighted and expand it, just give it more detail. Rephrase, also pretty self-explanatory, as well as shorten, also pretty self-explanatory. Let me show you what shorten looks like. If I want to do that, we can pick the model that we want to use. I'll just use 3.5 Sonnet, and it takes that little bit and shortens it down to this single paragraph, right? So I could hit apply if I wanted to use that, or I could hit discard to put it back to what it was before, like that. This is where I have the most fun in creating different prompts. So These three are the ones that are included by default. All of these others that you see here were added by me. I have one called Make It JSON, which basically uses a fine-tuned model based on my work to take this text and make it sound a little bit more like me. So if I do that, it rewrites the text to sound just a little bit more in a voice that sounds a little more natural in my style. So that can be a useful tool as well. And then I have others. One that I really like is this one that I've created right here, which is the flesh reading ease scale. Basically, all this prompt does is say, increase the flesh reading ease scale of this text to make it sound a little bit more natural. So if I hit that one, and we'll use Claude 3 Sonnet, you know, it'll write it. And usually the output is a little bit better and more readable for most people. So I'll go ahead and hit discard there. But you get the idea. Any of these prompts can be used to edit selections of text inside of the write section. So what else can you do in the write section? Well, we've gone over these prompts that you can do. You'll notice when you highlight something that you can also do your normal text modification things like bolding it, italicizing, underlining, crossing out, etc. You can also create your own snippet from this text. So say you wanted to take this text and create a snippet from it, you can put it all the way over here and it'll come into your snippets. You can name your snippet like sample text or whatever it is. You know, if you want to basically access that particular piece of text later, you can go ahead and do that and you've got a snippet. Also, if you select some of this text, you'll see another one that says codex entry. You can do the same thing here where you can create a codex entry from this generation, if that makes sense. You can also create a section, which basically takes all of this stuff that we just highlighted and creates a section that we'll just call sample text. And now this can be open and closed like an accordion with just this section. And this is useful if you are taking various models, for example. So let's say I generated a section with GPT-4o, then I wanted to see what it generated for the same section with Claude 3. I could generate it with GPT-4o, select everything, and then put it into a section called GPT-4o. Then I could generate it again with Claude and put that into a section with Claude, and then have an easy way to sort of compare between the two. And these sections can be included here. You can elect to not include them in the AI context, which could be useful if you have like multiple versions of the same scene. You can include maybe just one in the AI context so it's able to read that, but you have other options there as well. Again, there's lots of flexibility with Novelcrafter. You don't necessarily have to use all of this, but I'm just sort of showing you what is possible so you are familiar with it. Additionally, you can hit these three dots there and it'll tell you how many words are in that section. You can affect the quality. So if we made this blue, it'll show up as blue here. You can copy this content, you know, lots of things you can do with this section. And we can say delete this section and that'll just get rid of it, right? So that's how you write here in the write section. And that's pretty much everything you need to know about writing in this section. The AI does a good job of keeping track of where you are in the story and everything that has come before, as well as any characters that you're pulling into your story beats. There are a few other things that you can do here. So let's say we've got this section of text here that I've created and I can put a slash command and hit continue writing on it. All this will do is it'll continue immediately as I left off here, but with no guidance from me. So I could just say continue writing and generate prose. And from there, it just continues on, right? And so all this is basically just a scene beat where it says continue the story. Nothing's changed about it. You could add a few details here if you wanted to guide it just a little bit. So you could say continue the story in the style of H.P. Lovecraft, right? So I would hit, so let's discard what it wrote and try this again. And now it's in a much more H.P. Lovecraft type style. Additionally, here you can add a codex edition. We've already discovered what that does. It allows you to put more information about a character at a certain point in the story. You can add a horizontal rule and you can add sections here as well. So I'm going to delete all that, and that's pretty much everything you need to know about writing inside of Novelcrafter. But the next thing that we want to cover is how to use the chat in Novelcrafter, and that's what we're going to cover next. All right, so let's get into the chat a little bit here. Now, I've already gone through some of the basics already. You've seen it in action, but let me just walk you through it a little bit more methodically. First of all your chats are saved here. You can also access them here on the side. And one of the nice things that you can do if you have these on the side Say we want to really just use these story beats and have them readily accessible. So if you're in the right tab, you can select this, and then from here you can pin it, and it will actually just pin that particular chat right here. So you can go back and forth between it as you are writing. That's actually a very useful tool to have. So you can have this chat just with you at any time. So you can continue chatting here, asking it for feedback while you have your write window open right here. Or if you don't want to do that, you can just go, we'll just close this and go straight to the chat tab where you can chat with things here, any of these, or you can start a new chat down here. I've already showed off how you can include some context. What this does is it includes various parts of your novel or your outline in the chat. So the chat is aware of that before you even begin the chat. You can do it with your full novel outline, which pulls from the plan tab. You can do it with a specific scene, which will pull from not just the plan tab, but also the write tab for that specific scene if you have things that you want to discuss there. You can also even give it the full text of the novel, although as I mentioned before, you want to be careful with this because it can easily increase the amount that you're spending in your AI tokens. But another interesting thing that you can do here is you can actually access codex entries inside of the chat as well. And this is one of the important reasons why I would actually use this chat in here rather than using just any other generic chat bot somewhere else. And the reason for that is because you can include codex entries. So remember that we created this trope, enemies to lovers, right? So you could say something like, I want to brainstorm ways in which I can include and then I'm going to label it by the specific name that I've given it in the codex. Enemies to lovers trope. Because I use that exact name, it is now highlighted. So we know that it's pulling the information from the enemies to lovers trope into this novel. Brainstorm 10 ways that I can do this. Now, if I did it just like this, it might not know exactly what my story is about. So I want to make sure it also has access to my full novel outline in the context. So it has awareness of the story that I've got so far, but also awareness of the enemies to lovers trope because it's pulling from the codex. So if I hit send on that, it gives me a bunch of different ideas on how I could integrate that trope into this book. I'm going to go ahead and stop that. Additionally, one thing that I like to do is chat with a character. Now, I actually have a specific prompt that I use to do this. I got this prompt from members in the Novelcrafter community. So it's kind of a special prompt designed specifically for this task. I'll show you exactly how you can create prompts like this in a second, but we'll go ahead and select our model under the right prompt. I'll go ahead and we'll just select Claude 3 Sonnet. It looks like I haven't yet added Claude 3.5 yet, but now we're using the chat with people prompt. And so I could say something like, I want you to pretend you are Una, one of my main characters, right? Or better yet, since we've already spent some time creating this character together, let's say Guyan. I'm going to be an interviewer asking questions. And then from there, we hit send. And we get the character in all of his, everything that we have put into his personality right here. So we have clears throat and stands up straight, hand resting on the hilt of my sword. Greetings, I am Sir Guyan, Knight of Temperance. Ask your questions and I shall answer forthrightly. So it's very stiff and formal, and that may be what we wanted. I did say that in his dialogue and communication habits that he uses short, to the point sentences. It seems to have taken that into account. How is your day going? I give it a curt nod. A productive day as always. I arose before dawn to practice drills and meditations. Mastering the self is an endless journey, etc. So one of the good things that we can learn from doing things this way in the chat is we can actually refine the character voice a little bit. We might find that he's a little too stilted, maybe a little over the top, maybe a little cheesy. And so we can refine the prompt that we have for Guyan in here with his communication style, because we only have, he speaks in short, punchy sentences, always to the point. That's the only thing that we have here. We could add things like his dialogue is realistic, and while fitting the time period of medieval Britain, still sounds natural to modern readers. He uses an 8th grade reading level for the words that he speaks. So let's see if this affects the prompt in any way. What are you doing today? Today I must continue my quest to defeat the Acrasia, the foul enchantress who ensnares men's souls with foul temptations of the flesh. Her vile sorcery has already claimed too many good knights. The path ahead will not be easy, but with an iron will and clarity of purpose I shall persevere. What challenges a temperate soul truly have to fear? So this might not be better, but you can get the idea that you can play around with it. Definitely change the style a little bit. You want to play with that until you get a natural sounding voice that actually sounds more like you want this character to sound. So that's just another way that you can interact with codex entries inside of the chat. But let's say we don't want to do chatting with people. We just want to do a regular chat. And so that would be this system prompt here, general purpose, which we could select our model from there and then continue chatting in the general purpose system prompt, which just basically means it's a helpful assistant. We can take a look at the prompt later, but it's a helpful assistant that allows us to just interact the way we would with a normal chatbot. The other system prompt that you will find here is scene beats from summary, which you'll see here under system. So that's one of the default prompts that it has. So if we selected a model for that, let's just do 3.5 sonnet and we created a new chat. We could go ahead and just say create, well, let's go ahead and grab a chapter. So let's just say we want to do this chapter. Create scene beats from this chapter summary. Create 20 beats. And for some reason, when I left and came back, it reset. So we're going to go back to scene beats from summary with Claude 3.5 sonnet and then hit send. And then, of course, I forgot to actually add the scene summary. So don't forget to do that, but we'll go ahead and add that here. Now it should be able to add to create 20 beats. Here we go. Here are 20 detailed scene beats based on the provided chapter summary. Una and George share a passionate kiss as their wedding ceremony concludes, sealing their union. The wedding guests erupt in applause and cheers, signaling the start of the festivities. Una and George, hand in hand, descend from the altar to greet their well-wishers. And it continues on until we get to the end of the scene. So this is actually a really useful prompt, and one of the best prompts I've seen so far for creating scene beats. I often find myself creating scene beats myself, but with some of the newer models like Claude 3.5, I actually find that what the model gives me ends up being pretty good. So I'm pretty happy with this. And that's how you would use the other system prompt here in the chat, the one that is labeled scene beats from summary. And that's basically how the chat works. Again, you can work with this here. You can work with it here on the side. You can pin it to the side so you can continue working in the plan or the right tab. But the last thing that I want to make sure we cover is prompts. Now, I've already mentioned several times that there are system prompts and then there are prompts that you can make yourself. Here in the prompt section that's down here at the bottom left, you can create those prompts. Usually, probably the easiest way to go about this is to select a system prompt, and then up here at the top right, you select clone. From that clone, so it'll create, in this case, general purpose copy. And first of all, you can look at all of the different models that this prompt has available. Let's say you really know which models you like. You can delete as many of these as you want until you get to the ones you like. Additionally, you can add more models here. So let's just say, let's add Claude 3.5 sonnet, which would be right here. Go ahead and select that. And you can even play with the temperature, the top P, the max tokens, etc. If you don't put any information here, these will just be left at their default. But let's say we wanted to do a temperature of 0.7. I sometimes find the temperature, lowering the temperature creates a little bit more natural creative results. So sometimes adding that instead of the default of 1 is a good idea. And if you want to play with these, it'll affect how the model writes. And this is one of those things that you can't really do in a chatbot like ChatGPT or even Claude Pro. You can't play around with the temperature there. And so doing it here, you can't. So that's adding different models, and you can do this for as many models as you like. If you only have one model, so if I only have Claude 3.5 Sonnet, it will naturally use this prompt with this model without having to make any extra clicks. I'll show you what I mean. So if we go back to our right tab and we create a scene beat, when we go to generate prose, if we're using one like the system prompt here, you will have a choice to choose all of these different models, right? But if you're using the copy, I've only got one prompt here, and so all I have to do is click this once and it will automatically, boom, just go straight to the prompt. So I don't have to go through the extra step of choosing the model every time that I write. That can sometimes be useful if you have one particular model that you use for almost everything. But in general, you might want to have a couple of different options if the one model, for instance, is refusing to write certain scenes and things like that, and you need to switch to a model like Mistral Large or any of the other open source models that allow you to write more not safe for work content or something like that. But back to the prompts here. So we have scene beat completion prompts, which are exactly what they sound like. You type in the scene beat and it will write out that scene beat for you. And I have a couple of those here, including this one that we just made. And so to do this one, this is exactly a copy of what we had in the system prompt because I cloned it. And let's say all of this style information, like you don't really want this here, so you could just get rid of that. And maybe say you want to include some additional information here that it's not pulling in. As you can see in these brackets, you will see information here, and this is where it will be calling in information that you have already established. So remember when we were first starting up the settings for this novel, you can select like what is the tense? Is it first person, second person, third person omniscient? And so when you select that, it will automatically pull that into the prompt and say write in, say, third person limited here and use English, spelling, grammar, and colloquialisms / slang. Take into account the following characters, locations, items, and lore. And this is where it pulls in your entire codex. Let's say you didn't want it to pull in the entire codex, so you could get rid of that and just say, please take into account the following characters, locations, and lore. You could add the brackets here and it will give you a list of all of the different things that you can select here inside of the brackets. And there's a lot of these, so don't get overwhelmed. I'll show you where you can find more descriptions about these in the meantime. But if you wanted to get just, say, the characters, you could select context.codex.characters, which would only be pulling in the codex for your characters that are listed here. And then this prompt also brings in the story so far. This is everything that is in the plan tab that you have created so far. So everything up to this chapter. It won't tell you the entire outline of the book, but it will give you basically everything that's happened in the book up to this point so that the AI has the context to be able to keep writing. So that's useful to have. Then we have some code here, and I wouldn't worry about this too much, but you can modify this to say this is basically pulling in the last couple of 100 words and giving you context like up to 2,000 words before. So you can change this if you want. And then lastly, it gives you the user thing where it says the scene point of view. So if the character point of view that we've established is from the point of view of Guyan, then it would select the scene point of view here is Guyan. And then at the end of this prompt, we have continue the story and write about 400 words for the following instructions. And then it brings in the scene beat, whatever that scene beat is that you've written. And you can adjust this, say like 400 words is too little. You want to up that to 800 words. You can do that here and you can add whatever other instructions that you want to add. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete this prompt since I don't really need to use it. But I've created a number of prompts here. I created one specifically for nonfiction. So I took out a couple of the instructions here that were more fiction oriented. I made sure that everything else was more or less the same, but I added a few things like you are an expert nonfiction writer and just a few little tweaks here to make it more applicable for nonfiction. I have another one here that's a little bit more simple that I've designed specifically to use with Claude that I find gives me a lot of good results. So you can go to town and create whatever prompts here that you want. Additionally, you might have those text replacement prompts. So these are the prompts that show up when you highlight a section of text. And by default, there are only 3 system prompts. There's expand, rephrase, and shorten. And like the other prompts that we covered already, you can choose which models get used in these, as well as the actual prompt. You can't actually edit the system prompts, but you can make a clone of it and tweak it from there. I have a couple of these. So I mentioned that the Flesh Reading Ease score is one that's worked well for me. And it's a very simple prompt. All I have in the system message is you are an expert prose editor. And then in the user section, I have rewrite the following text to have a better Flesh Reading Ease score. And then it brings in whatever the selection was. And even though that's a pretty simple prompt, I found it to be very useful, especially when dealing with writing from other people example that I didn't think was very good, if I want to improve it. For instance, I've used some freelancers in the past that they were clearly not native English speakers and the text reflected that. So this is a prompt that I would use to kind of edit their text to sound a little bit more natural and flow a little better. So this is a good example of one of those prompts that I use here in Novelcrafter. Then we have like make it past tense, another pretty simple one where I basically say when you're given text, make sure to change it to past tense, and then I give it the context selection, etc. Now, if you're curious about these little code snippets between the brackets, the curly brackets here, and you want to know more about them, because that is admittedly one of the more slightly overwhelming things if you're just coming new to this program, is understanding how to work with these and include them. So this is just, you can consider this to be a placeholder for something that the program itself will bring in. So in this case, the context selection means if I'm in the right tab and I select a piece of text, this is the context selection. So anytime that prompt is run, it will pull in these paragraphs here that I've selected, and that's the context selection. And if you want to know more about this, there's a document here on Novelcrafter's documents where you can learn more about all of these prompting techniques and what each one does. So we have like series title, returns the title of the associated series if any. Series description, returns the description of the associated series if any, etc. We have snippet. Remember, I mentioned that you can actually bring in a snippet into a prompt if you want to. This is how you would do it. You would use a snippet.get, and then in parentheses, title equals string, you would replace it with the name of the snippet. I'll show you an example of what this particular thing looks like in action on Novelcrafter. So in my Write with Claude scene beat completion, I say, here is a sample chapter of the prose style to use. And then I have snippets.get sample. I put these in some brackets so it knows that this is a sample chapter. I want you to write like this. And so it will pick up on any snippets that I have that are named sample and place them here into the prompt. And wouldn't you know it, over here I have a snippet called sample. So it's pulling in this sample chapter into the prompt in order to write the chapter. So this is a really useful guide to understand what each of these pieces of code do and how you can use them to craft your prompts and really get some really nice complicated prompts. I have it on good authority that the developers behind Novelcrafter are creating a hub where you will eventually be able to share prompts with other people. No idea yet when that's gonna go live, but I will be sure to create a video about it when it does go live, and you'll be able to see other prompts that people are using and are willing to share. So that gives you a little bit of an overview of what the prompting section looks like and how you can create your own prompts inside of Novelcrafter. There's one other thing that I want to cover that you can do here inside of the prompting section, and that is, let's say you want to share this prompt with somebody else. Up here in the top right corner of your prompt, you can click on these three dots and say copy to clipboard. And if you just hit that, it will copy the whole thing to a clipboard. Let's just pull up a notepad here and I copy what it gave me. It looks like a random string of numbers, right? Well, what you can do is actually go here to new and say create from clipboard, and it will look at what's copied to your clipboard and create a new prompt from that. And what this does is it copies everything, including what the models are, what the instructions are, and everything is exactly copied. So one of the things that you can do here is share these prompts that I have here. I could share these prompts with anybody else. It would look like this jumble of numbers that we saw on that notepad, but anybody that took that jumble of numbers and then said create prompt from clipboard would be able to get my prompt exactly. And that's what I'm doing in my prompt library, which you can get for free. The same place where you sign up for my 40 chapter plot module that I talked about earlier, you can get my prompt library, which will have a couple of these that I've talked about already. So you can just copy and paste it into your own Novelcrafter account. Again, that's available for free just by signing up for my newsletter at storyhacker.ai. So I hope all of that was useful for you. And if you want to know more on this subject, I've done a whole video comparing Novelcrafter to its leading competitor, Sudowrite, so you can get a sense for how the two measure up against each other. Some of the things that I talk about are a little bit out of date, and I'll talk more about those in the future. I'll do a recap of the video again in the future. So you might see that video, the future video, here at a later date anyway. So if you're interested in learning how Novelcrafter shapes up to its competitors, particularly Sudowrite, definitely go check out that video, and I will see you in the next one and get a sense for how this... So if you're interested in learning how Novelcrafter shapes up to other competitors, So if you're interested in learning how Novelcrafter shapes up according to its, gosh, why can't I get this right?